In most cases, what's preventing this from happening is there's culture within the company that are favoring this old school playbook, what some people even call like dinosaur marketing. And in order to break out of that, there typically needs to be a CEO level communique, a Slack message, an email, whatever it is that said, look, I've visited some of the conferences in the last couple of months. I've hung out in the booth. I've done ride-alongs with him. And it's bothering me a lot that we have all these great experts in our company and our prospects and even some of our clients are treating us like crap. They're sarcastic, they're dismissive, they talk over us, they roll their eyes at us, they talk bad things about us behind our back. We're so much better than this. We have some of the top experts on the planet when it comes to data center commissioning, and it's time we let the industry know about it big time.
Yeah.
We want to be seen as the world-leading experts on anything and everything that has to do with our part of data center commissioning. And going forward, we're going to make massive, massive investments to be able to make that happen. And this is the roadmap of what it looks like going forward.
Hey, Joshua Feinberg here from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. Now, normally on the Data Center Market podcast, I'm the one doing the interviewing with fantastic guests from across data center operators, technology, facilities, construction, real estate, and investment, including CEOs, chief revenue officers, chief commercial officers, marketing leaders, product leaders, and other founder, entrepreneur, and GTM leaders. However, this episode is a little different. This time around, I am the one being interviewed by Blair, who is founder of Baseline, a executive search firm specializing in data center commissioning for the US data center construction industry. And Cal also hosts the Inside Commissioning podcast. So let's listen in to my talk. Fantastic insights, great questions, and I think you'll really enjoy it, regardless of whether you're in the commissioning business or you partner with or work in the ecosystem side by side with others that are directly or indirectly related to data center commissioning.
Welcome back to Inside Commissioning. I'm Blair, and today I'm joined by Joshua Feinberg, founder of DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. He's also the host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, which is closing in on almost 200 episodes. So Joshua's a bit of a different guest for this show. He's not a commissioning engineer. He spent his whole career in sales and marketing, starting out as a 17-year-old campus rep for IBM, writing for Microsoft Press, and eventually specializing in how data center companies win business. So this episode is for the commissioning firm owners and leaders out there, basically anyone whose job it is to bring work in. We get into why so much of the buying decision now happens before you ever get a call, why firms are hiring engineers onto sales teams, and a genuinely practical playbook for winning better work through education rather than cold outreach, one that costs almost nothing to run. Joshua also doesn't hold back on what he calls the conference cult and why that money is probably better spent elsewhere. If business development is any part of your role, this one is worth your time. Let's get into it. Joshua, good morning.
Hi, Cal. How's it going?
Very well. Very well. How are you?
Very good. Excellent.
Good. I appreciate you jumping on today and coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm flattered to be joining you on Inside Commissioning.
Well, you're an absolute expert in this field, which I'm sure we'll come into with the amount of podcasts that you've produced over the years. So hopefully it can live up to your standard, but excited to get into the conversation today and learn more about you and everything you've got sort of thoughts wise on the data center industry, and particularly how sort of commissioning firms can win more work, win better work out there in the data center industry moving forward. I think it's be certainly useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So Joshua, you've spent 15 years in tech consulting before moving into the data center industry. Tell me about how you got into this industry and how it all came about.
So as a teenager, going off to college, I responded to an ad in the student newspaper for IBM looking for campus representatives. This was in the relatively early days of PCs and Windows. And at the time I was a freshman, I was a first year student. And I think I was pre-business at the time. They were looking for technical majors that were, I think, computer science or engineering, and they were looking for a minimum of sophomores. So I must have said something right on the initial screening or the interview, because they dropped the requirements. They were fine with the fact that I was 17 and a freshman, and they were fine that I was not a technical major. And that ended up being a really, really fortunate move on my part. I kind of look at that was my other bachelor's degree, my other college degree, being able to have that experience of working with the grown-ups on the team. We were focused on higher education at the time, working with the team out of Princeton, New Jersey, Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and got really into field marketing, product marketing, sales and marketing the year I was getting ready to graduate. However, IBM was laying off 120,000 people. So all of my mentors, all of the fantastic advisors that I'd built up in that period of time were exiting the company and moving in other directions, and ended up starting a system building business, what today would be known as like a value-added reseller, computer reseller, network integrator. And again, taking a lot of the contacts that I'd built up in higher education, got involved in K-12, a little bit of early SMB, small and medium-sized business technology adoption, authorized reseller discounts. A big part of what I worked on for the 5 years in higher education was in the early days of Windows, whether Microsoft, WordPerfect, Lotus, Borland, everyone wanted to get significant market share among students, faculty, and staff, and they all had significant discounts. So a lot of demos, a lot of teaching. And this was my first brush at running micro events. When I was working for IBM, we did a lot of campus fairs. We did a lot of traditional field marketing. When I pivoted into my own business at the time, I figured out that I could run small ads in newspapers and postcards and get groups of 10, 20, 30 people together and teach. And that was the beginning of me figuring out that education could be used as a sales enablement and sales acceleration tool. And that's something that throughout a huge, huge part of my career has been supremely important. I also figured out at the time when I was both working for IBM and on my own that writing and how-to articles and educational content was also a huge, huge enabler. And this was probably a good 6 or 8 years before the beginning of the commercial web. So the content was literally getting typed up in like WordPerfect or Microsoft Works or something like that and photocopied and given out. But yeah, I was figuring out that both teaching and the educational content really, really opened doors and built up a lot of trust. And that's something that today, even in the, I guess we'd probably consider Web 3.0 and generative AI and video content and social media content is still super, super important. So throughout the 90s, I pivoted from higher education and SMB into a few years of enterprise IT support, working for some big financial services companies and telecommunications companies. By the late 1990s, I was back into doing my own thing again, working as a fractional CTO, SMB technology adoption. But this time around, I had all of the experience from the previous 7, 8, 9 years and was doing even more writing, doing even more teaching. I ended up as a contributing editor for a IT channel trade publication.
Right.
And for the next 10 years or so, built a training program for SMB focused, small, medium-sized business focused VARs and technology consultancies and what today would be known as managed service providers, MSPs, on marketing, sales, project management, subcontracting, partnering with others. And that took us well into the early 2010s. Around the time that was happening, I noticed a big trend where a lot of the SMB focused like fractional CTO had done reasonably well with modeling their businesses to be seen as like a trusted business advisor. They all wanted to be seen in the same light as like accountants and management consultants and attorneys. And we're doing a lot of work to position themselves in that light. But I also saw when the Great Recession happened in 2008 to the early 2010s, that a lot were at the point, somewhere at the point where they were retiring and they were looking to have succession in their business. A lot of them were facing a lot of commoditization, but the ones that were figuring out what to do next, I saw moving in one of three directions. About a third of them were moving up market into like mid-market and specializing in like ERP platforms, enterprise resource planning, or something similar to that. About another third got really heavily involved in building web apps and mobile apps. And then the other third went all in on infrastructure. And that's when I first learned about colocation. And that's how I ended up getting involved in the data center industry. And I often tell people that are brand new to the data center industry today that you almost need to take like the hop on, hop off bus tour. Like when you're dropped off in a city and you want to see 8 or 10 or 12 destinations around London or New York or wherever you are for the day, and a little bit of each. And you kind of need to get that orientation to truly understand what's going on within at DCSMI, we track 57 different business models between the operators, 22 different kinds of tech companies, 13, 14 different kinds of facilities companies. It is a complex industry, and making it all work together is a huge part of understanding how to put together a coherent go-to-market strategy. Even in the sector you specialize in commissioning, they really have to have a deep appreciation of how all the different pieces fit together. So for the first couple of years, I understood the tech side. A lot of managed service providers have morphed into colocation providers. And then we got into the early 2020s and generative AI. There was a certain amount of consolidation that was happening throughout the 2010s as like locals would roll up into regionals would roll up into nationals. But I really see it accelerating quite dramatically the last couple of years because the cost of projects now for building new facilities has just gone up exponentially. At the time when I was doing a lot of fractional CMO kind of work, outsourced inbound marketing, content marketing, thought leadership kind of work. In the 2010s, most of the clients were what I'd consider either early stage, seed stage, Series A, Series B, mom and pop kind of colocation owners. Most of those companies have been consolidated, exited, sold to larger companies at this point, just because it's really not super viable to have that kind of business anymore with just 10 or 20 employees and just a couple $1 million in revenue. So that's what's caused me to specialize a little bit more the last couple of years and working primarily with data center technology focused companies and data center facilities related companies because of so much of a change in the competitive landscape, commoditization, differentiation struggles, the basics of what it takes to scale these kind of businesses and how much capital is really needed to be successful and it's always been small companies selling to mid-market and enterprise. It's gotten a lot more complicated in the last couple of years, especially now because of the self-driven journey, which for sure I want to talk with you more about today.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. That's really, very interesting background, very unique entry into kind of how you got doing what you were doing. And I'm sure kind of going back when you mentioned with the IBM work and everything that you did there and kind of getting into training, enablement, I suppose that was a very different way of maybe selling or gaining kind of traction or revenue traction in the market rather than just your normal pick up the phone and sell type model. I suppose the content, the thought leadership type approach to marketing and sales now is something that a lot of people know about in a lot of different industries. But I suppose back then when you first started doing it, it must have been pretty unique, right?
Yes. And like I mentioned earlier before, one of the really special things about that opportunity was getting mentored by so many people that were in the mid part of their career that really loved working with college students and teaching the next generation, which I know is a theme that continues to this day in the technology industry. But what was especially helpful as well is we did a lot of co-marketing events with our counterpart from Microsoft. And because of that, I was primed to really take that and run with that as a core part of the system builder business that I had done next. It's pretty insane to think that I was put in a position to get all of this experience while I was still a teenager.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
it really set my career up for a ton of being able to navigate both various kinds of marketing and sales and market fragmentation.
Awesome. And you just touched on the podcast there. So, I mean, I would have given a bit of an intro before we jumped on here today about you and the podcast. So the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. Tell me, Joshua, just kind of brief kind of overview as to what that podcast is all about. And then I know you touched on it as well, DCMS, what that is, what you do kind of on a day-to-day basis, just in general, and the kind of the value that you provide.
So DCSMI is the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. It was started as a side project in 2018 as a spinoff of my micro marketing agency that I was building at the time, SP Home Run. And the reason it was started is I saw that at the time we were working with managed service providers, software developers, SaaS companies, and data center related businesses. And I saw that data centers face some rather unique challenges because even back then, even though a lot of the buyer personas were similar, they were all selling to IT decision makers and smaller companies. They were selling to a technical founder, and the persona shifted a little bit depending on the business model. I saw data centers taking a vastly different approach than what most of the other kinds of technology companies were working with at the time. So the early incarnation of DCSMI was benchmarking different colocation operators against each other and looking at how effective they were in digital marketing. We were doing some webinars, doing a little bit of education on that, but I sensed that the time wasn't quite right to get full adoption on that. And I sensed that a lot of it would need some generational turnover for companies. And sure enough, that's what ended up happening between 2018 and the early 2020s. We had a bunch of things happen. One, you had tens of millions of people out of necessity, got very used to working from home and becoming a lot more self-sufficient. So it accelerated a lot of digital transformation. You had the 10,000 baby boomers a day for a while were retiring. Some of them came back into the workforce because of inflationary and other kinds of demographic kinds of things. You ended up with a lot more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles. And all of a sudden, the the self-guided research process that was 50, 60 of the journey in the 2010s has now jumped to the point where nearly everyone, by the time you talk to them, has done massive amounts of research before they got to you. Because now not only do they have LinkedIn and YouTube and podcasts and webinars and review sites to figure all this out. Now they have these great tools where you can get instant analyst grade insights from ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Claude. And so what's ended up happening is a lot of technical buyers, both on the IT side and on the engineering side and the other stakeholders in the data center industry, now prefer to do a lot of research on their own as opposed to talking to traditional salespeople. So traditional salespeople are being forced to reinvent themselves to be seen more like teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and trusted advisors. And there's a couple different ways that that's happening. For starters, I noticed 2, 3, 4 years ago with a lot of the podcast guests that I was interviewing on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, especially from tech companies and especially from data center operators, I was seeing this trend where sales professionals were investing in certifications, training and certification credentials that would put them on par, at least with the entry-level individual contributors in the companies they were selling into. And the reason they were doing that is a lot of their prospects and clients weren't even willing to take meetings with them because they sensed they couldn't add enough value, because a lot of them at the time were showing up and literally reading the contents of the website to them or reading the slides to them. And for a sales allergic, cynical, anti-sales, anti-marketing kind of IT leader, engineering leader, that was kind of killing the momentum. So they were investing in those skills to get to better conversations and a higher level of trust. And then at the same time, I also started to notice, again, through macro trends of interviewing dozens of guests on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, I saw a lot more CEOs and chief commercial officers and chief revenue officers hiring IT professionals and engineers onto sales teams, even if they'd never participated in a revenue organization in their entire career. And the reason that they were doing that was because their ideal clients, their core buyer personas didn't want anything to do with sales or marketing, but they're still super interested in talking to peers. So essentially what they were doing is hiring someone that was a peer of that person in their previous career and would have instant credibility, both from a LinkedIn bio perspective, but being able to navigate the organizations, understand the true challenges. And they were able to walk in on day one and not just have window dressing to say that they were a teacher and a consultant and a trusted advisor and an expert. They actually were the trusted advisor and the expert because of their career experience. A great example is I had someone on the podcast about 6 months ago who worked in healthcare IT, worked for as a CTO or IT executive for hospitals throughout his whole career. So when they go and they call on anything related to healthcare, he can lean on his resume and immediately it has massive, massive amounts of credibility. I saw someone that I had on the podcast who's a sales leader for Supermicro that had been a data center technology executive for Microsoft for several years before that. Again, massive, massive credibility when they go to partner with companies like NVIDIA and other people in that data center ecosystem. So again, it's a combination of upskilling. And the great part with upskilling is even though there's a handful of tremendous formal training companies in the data center industry, even if your employer doesn't have a couple $1,000s per course, or you don't want to invest, or you can't invest that yourself, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, Udemy, Google Career Certificates, watching podcasts like this, there are an amazing amount of free and inexpensive ways to level up and reskill and reinvent yourself to stay relevant. So it's a combination of that and a combination of seeing a lot more of these jobs, as you probably see firsthand in the job requirements. You get a lot more jobs requiring computer science backgrounds, requiring engineering backgrounds, even in fairly entry-level jobs. But in a world where essentially sales teams are in competition for attention with generative AI, having this talent on the team, even if they're not the lead person, even if there's someone who's more of a project manager, relationship manager, the fact that they can bring that person in sitting next to them at the table is incredibly important. And when it comes to even events, having that kind of person be the featured speaker at events is incredibly impactful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen that happen a couple of times with, I've done a lot of work over the last sort of 5 years in the broader SaaS world. And, I can point to a couple of people I know that are probably, that have done incredibly well in a more sales or revenue generating role, purely for the fact that they've come from that industry vertical that they're selling that software into, that they just understand the buyer, they understand the issues that they're facing on a day-to-day, they're relatable. Doesn't work for every sector, of course, or every niche, but even just someone, I can point to someone who was kind of more on the operations side, moved into sales. Sales wasn't kind of natural for him, but he's grown that skill over time. But he got so much traction just purely for the fact that his knowledge, was ahead of 99.9% of any other person trying to sell into that type of customer in that industry. And that's what got him the respect, the traction, and ultimately kind of where he got to today. So yeah, I've seen it happen a couple of times on a broader level. So I can certainly see how that can play a big part for sure. Joshua, I'm keen to kind of move this now, kind of dial it in a bit further, more kind of specific to the commissioning industry, and obviously where kind of my audience is specifically. Kind of next question for you would be, for a commissioning firm, let's say, that has won a lot of their work to date through relationships or referrals, now in 2026 and beyond, what's their first move if they want to get in front of more potential customers or the right type of customers? Like, what would you say to a commissioning firm leader or owner right now that's looking to grow, looking to win more clients, better clients, that is, starting from that kind of point right now?
When I speak with people that do data center commissioning or are in adjacent spaces like supply chain or adjacent parts of power and energy, one of their biggest struggles is in many cases they're working through intermediaries. And because of that, not only is it taking a lot of margin away from their business, but they're not getting in there early enough to truly shape the priorities. So they end up being treated like an order taker, and they end up being commoditized, and it ends up putting a very low ceiling on the kind of talent that they can afford to recruit and pay. And it really puts a lid on their business model. So what I see with a lot of companies that are doing commissioning is they're trying to have more of a direct relationship with the hyperscalers and the data center developers, as opposed to having to work through like an EPC firm or other kinds of intermediaries that get in between there. And what's interesting about that is I think a lot have known that this has been an issue for quite some time. Roughly, I'm closing in on like episode 200 of the podcast, roughly 100 interviews. I have not had that many people on the podcast who come from commissioning, mostly because a lot operate like what in the US they'd call the CIA. Like everything's like a James Bond movie, double top secret. I had someone on about a year ago who's an engineer and commissioning expert for one of the biggest players in the space, Bureau Veritas. And it was a great interview. It was really, really well received. And earlier this year, I put out a compilation report of best practices, future looking best practices on where data center facilities are going. One of the interesting plays that I recommend that a lot of people do that get into podcasting is don't just look at it as content. Don't just look at it as relationship building, but look at it as a research tool. Because when you start to interview people across common geographic segments, common business models, common demographics, you will start to see some patterns jump out. So what I did in compiling this report is when you ask a couple dozen people the same question, like when you look into the crystal ball, what does growing a commissioning company look like for you 12, 18, 24 months down the road? So it was compiled into a report. And sure enough, this report gets published out there and someone from the same company reaches out to me and says, that person didn't have permission to be on your podcast. Who are they? I can't find, it's like this weird attitude. And I've seen this throughout the US as well. There's a big part of the reason that I haven't had that many people on the podcast from data center operators is there's this culture inside of companies that starts at like the CMO level and is reinforced by a relationship with a PR firm and reinforced with a relationship with conferences where they essentially want to place a person on a podcast and have them basically show up reading cue cards or a teleprompter of everything that's 100% scripted. And I think the sentiment is that when these experts go on a podcast that's tied to a conference or a media company that they spend money with, they feel like they can basically take an editorial event and basically make it an advertorial and pretend as if it wasn't advertorial. And this is an enormous problem that I see going on in this industry right now. And what I'd be thinking about from the perspective of a data center commissioning company is who the core ideal clients are that you're really trying to reach, dialing in. Can you truly service clients globally? Do you have team members that are either located in that region or can travel to that region to be on site for a couple of weeks at a time or a couple of months at a time for these big commissioning projects? How big these companies need to be be in your wheelhouse? Are you effective in the mid-market? Or are you only really selling to enterprise-size organizations? And are there certain verticals where you're better suited than others? That's on the account level. And then on the stakeholder level, at the company size you're selling to, who you really need to be building relationships with to be effective. Are they the investment officers, the commissioning counterpart internally? Is it an engineering person? Is it a development officer? Is it a small enough company that if you don't get traction all the way to the C-level that you're going nowhere fast? And that needs to be calibrated basically not only based on the size of the commissioning company, but based on the target client, because that's going to inform who the stakeholders are that typically show up on the decision committee. And I always encourage people, once you have product market fit and you know exactly what you're selling and who you're selling it to, look at the last 5 or 10 successful engagements you have, look in your CRM and see who was involved, who is integral, and reverse engineer and think about what it's going to take to attract and engage and educate and build trust with people just like that. And what's ending up happening is people are getting more self-sufficient with doing the research and more risk averse. Even if you manage to get a meeting with the CEO, they're almost certainly going to send it back to their team members who will ultimately need to weigh in. So at the end of the day, the commissioning companies that are successful need to essentially be multilingual. And Europe, obviously multilingual is incredibly important just from a practical standpoint, but it's beyond just like, okay, if we're of course doing business in France and Spain and Germany, yeah, for sure we need to be multilingual, but it's multilingual in that you're able to speak engineering and speak finance and speak IT and speak ESG and all these different kinds of interests that ultimately determine whether you're on the short list or not.
Most data center GTM teams are flying completely blind. 83% of your buyer's journey is happening before they even speak with someone from your sales team. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is powered by DCSMI. We've studied over 1,900 industry leaders to build a diagnostic framework that identifies exactly why deals fall apart and revenue stalls. Stop guessing and start benchmarking. Subscribe now to our weekly Data Center GTM briefing at www.dcsmi.com/briefing. Again, that's dcsmi.com/briefing, BRIEFING.
And I think a lot of commissioning companies are massively underestimating how much of the decision making is happening before they ever get the first outreach from a potential prospect. So the companies that are going to do well are the ones that are going to be in there early and often and seen as teaching. They're going to be the ones that are continually running fantastic webinar series, fantastic breakfast seminars and lunch and learns. And the great part for commissioning companies is these micro events cost very, very little to run compared to the cost of traditional national or global conferences. For even a mid-sized company, like 2 equivalent full-time people could run basically a couple dozen of micro events a year. Which sounds crazy just in and of itself. And what kind of financial support would they need? Relatively little. You already have a classroom or a conference room that can seat 15 or 20 people there, and it has a TV on the wall or a projector, you're set. You basically rent that facility for free. If you're calling these breakfast events, okay, well, you need to probably put out pastries and some fruit and coffee and juice. Or if you're calling them lunch and learn events of sandwiches, salads, pizza, whatever it is. But it's so when you have your own facility to be able to do this, it's so inexpensive to run these events. I think where a lot of data center commissioning companies could benefit from capital efficiency is truly understanding that ideal client profile, having that very defined list of potential accounts they want to work, and then get really, really disciplined about most of your investments focusing just on that. I think this is a challenge a lot with conferences as well. There's a huge interest in the data center industry on going to these dozens of conferences all over Europe, all over the Americas, all over Latin, basically all over the globe. You could literally book yourself on a conference pretty much 52 weeks of the year, because even maybe 48 or 49 weeks of the year, because even the weeks when it's a holiday on one particular region. So there's always another conference that's going on. The challenge with a lot of these conferences is the audience that they're attracting a lot of times is way too broad to be hyper precise into just your particular ideal client profile, just your addressable markets. I always tell people when you're evaluating these broad-based investments is to get their media kit, get their prospectus, and see what are they telling you about the demographics that attended last year and what they think is going to attend this year. Put that on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side of your screen, bring up your one-page definition of your ICP, your ideal client profile, and your 2 or 3 important buyer personas, and look and see if it's a really tight match, then you're probably on the right track. If it's a very weak match, then you're probably not on the right track. And then there's a lot of gray areas. That's part of it. And then the second part of it is getting yourself in a position where you can educate and build trust. And that's becoming increasingly difficult. And these broad conferences where only 3% of the people actually speak. And then having your own slot where you're speaking for 30 or 40 minutes yourself, or you're sharing that with 5 or 6 other people, or you're speaking on a day of the conference where attendance is peaking, or are you speaking on the last afternoon of the last day? So there's a lot of subtle things that go into trying to figure out this investment. But in terms of getting hyper specific about spending your time educating and building trust with the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context, there's a lot of work for commissioning companies to help figure this out. Interview-based podcasting, though, is if you can focus primarily on most of your interviews being with the primary or secondary stakeholders in these target accounts, you will learn a ton of research that can be incredibly valuable to shaping your entire business strategy, not just what to do with sales and marketing, but uncovering new areas of demand that you may not have even known existed, new segments of the market that are moving faster or moving slower, that people are way more likely to share this in an more casual, less structured format than in a much more structured format at a conference where there's a lot of hovering going on because of the amount of spend and control and just the culture of the companies altogether.
Conference circuit, as you mentioned there. I mean, I've not been to many conferences in my life. I've only been to one data center specific one earlier on this year in London, and I couldn't stand it. To be honest with you. But I think the conference, and I've seen this in the software industry more broadly, kind of over the last few years. I think conferences, if you're going to invest in being there, traveling there, having a stand there, and really kind of investing in a presence there, I think it's probably a lot better suited if you actually have a unique offering. So, for example, you are a technology product, or you are an OEM, let's say, or a supplier, or you manufacture something that is unique compared to potentially a lot of your competitors. Whereas I think, yeah, exactly the same way as that I'm a recruitment consultant, there's a lot of recruitment consultants out there. We all deliver the same kind of service. I suppose, commissioning firms do as well. They might have their own unique way of doing it, but really there isn't really much unique there to share. It's more just relationship building. And as you say, and I agree with you, now in 2026, that isn't going to be the first time that potential buyer has done research on someone at a conference. It's going to be way, way before that. So it's, I fully agree with you that it's as an efficient use of capital just to be spending days and weeks and months on the road, just getting to conferences to try and hopefully get in front of that right person. It could be directed in a much more capital efficient way for sure.
I think I used to refer to it as the conference circuit. I now refer to it more as the conference cult now. Because it shares so many characteristics. There's people in larger companies whose full-time job it is to basically be a full-time conference evangelist. And when you work in a sales and marketing organization that has hundreds of people, you can afford to dedicate one person whose job it is to sit on every panel, speak at every conference, take people out for meals to wine and dine them and schmooze them at this. For a small to mid-sized company, it is extraordinarily hard to play the conference cult game and these pop-up country clubs or whatever you want to call them. That's all about schmoozing and outspending each other. And I think there's a very real parallel to, in the 2010s, there was this term called TCO, total cost of ownership, that was really big among IT professionals. And a lot of the TCO math was used to help figure out when to build a data center, when to co-locate, when to go into cloud, when to do private cloud, when to do hybrid cloud. But so the total cost of a conference is a lot more than what it seems on the surface, because when you get into national and global conferences, if you are exhibiting, there's always a full day of setup the day before. So the 3-day event, you're up to 4 days already. You need a day of travel on each side, so you're up to 6 days already. In order to justify the massive amount of spend that you've convinced your CFO and CEO and board that was absolutely positively necessary to spend tens of thousands or 6 figures or more on this particular event, you're scrambling like a mad person in the days before to book meetings, not just with the people in your ICP, and which may be pretty thin coverage if you didn't do your diligence. So all of a sudden now you're happy to meet with anyone. The whole idea with the authenticity here is just coming from a place where recognizing that most of the people that you're selling to, regardless of the roles, do not trust sales and marketing people anymore. So the more we look like an aggressive, prototypical, all fluff, no substance kind of salesperson, the more we're going to be rejected. The more we look like a peer of theirs, the more we're going to be warmly welcomed. So everything with getting this right is about using the teaching and the learnings as the foot in the door. And it's not one and done. It's early and often. And the often part is incredibly important. That's why, at the risk of oversimplifying it, if you can think of a event calendar with one event a month over the next 12 months, that's the mindset that should go into this. The tricky part is it's a lot of work to get good at this. The good part is once you do get good at it, it's really not very expensive to run this. It's really just a matter of reallocating priorities, because the SDR, instead of spamming people, cold calling people, whatever you want to call it, to try to book a sales meeting, their whole motion is all about just basically outreach, so that if there's 20 seats in your classroom, that you're filling up 16, 17, or 18 of them, or ideally all 20 of them with the perfect people from the perfect target accounts in that particular segment to learn for that particular expert. And when you look at wanting to do this pretty much every single week, so you're running 40, 45 of these in person a year. By the way, the other thing that I should mention as well is commissioning is very physical. Proximity is really important, but you may not have the luxury of being in the exact same geographic market where your prospects and clients are located. That's fine. When you can, it's far better to host these in person. But when you can't, take the exact same content and run them virtually, run them as webinars.
Yeah.
Because then, short of just being able to optimize the time of day and time of the week, it's a lot easier to get people to attend. I mean, obviously with both in person and virtual, record all of these. There's always going to be people that approach you afterwards and say, my engineer, my CFO, our COO, our CEO, whoever it is, they really should have been here. Is there any way you can get a copy of the slides? Yeah, of course I can give you the slides, but I can do one better. I can give you the recording. And the real knockout punch with all of this is when you get confident enough in your curriculum, package it up into an academy with a certification. And then all of a sudden, the people that have graduated from your academy are flashing their badge and their PDF on their LinkedIn profile. And not only is it tremendously sticky for your brand, but they're essentially becoming an extension of your go-to-market engine. This has been around for decades. I was an early Microsoft certified system engineer in the late 1990s. I got dozens of HubSpot certification. Companies have really truly understood that there's an enormous amount of leverage by being the ones that teach and that credential particular segments. And I see some people that are starting to lean into this. There's a organization that released a course earlier this year on data center safety.
Right. Yeah.
They're going to make big inroads. Remember, you do not need permission to educate and build trust. You don't need Jensen Huang or Sam Altman to sign your permission slip. Cal, if you decide that you want to teach an amazing course on talent best practices for data center commissioners, you can go teach an amazing course on talent acquisition best practices for data center commissioning. And you can have worksheets and exercises and practicum and a multiple choice test and a credential at the end. And it's funny, like a lot of these things that SaaS companies have figured out in the 2010s, that their exact buyer, there's so much persona overlap. I don't know why there's so much resistance in pockets of the data center industry, because it's not a matter of will this work. It's more a matter of why people are allowing egos and politics and optimizing for exits to bulldoze what's doing right to be client-centric.
Yeah. I love that. And I completely agree. I think, I don't know who quotes it, but yeah, you literally can just do things like that. There is no one stopping you. And it brings me nicely on to kind of what I was going to say in my kind of observation. And I think you kind of touched on it there, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot, obviously as a recruiter. I see people on LinkedIn. I see what they're posting. I see what companies are posting. And it's amazing. Certainly in the kind of the small to medium size commissioning firm, let's say, or similar type firm, delivering these services, you can tell that, like marketing as an example, it's just a box ticking exercise. I feel like they've kind of got to this point and it's like, we should do marketing and this is what you should do. And okay, we need a junior marketing coordinator that's going to be posting on our LinkedIn company page 3 to 5 times a week. That's going to be, shouting about, whatever it is, or, just putting nice Canva curated posts out when it's a public holiday and all that sort of stuff. And it's such, I don't know, maybe it's just been around too long, but it's just such surface level stuff that there is no way to be able to quantify what the return is on that, versus, as you say, thinking about it in a much more strategic approach to be saying, getting in front of the right people, investing in educating and enabling, and those conversations in turn will spin off the type of content that a marketing coordinator can go out and post on LinkedIn and do all that stuff. But it's just that kind of surface level. Yeah, we've got a blog. We've got a newsletter. We post on our LinkedIn 3 to 5 times a week. Like, we've done marketing. I see it so much.
It's like compliance. It's like they're And what usually ends up happening is these initiatives are severely underfunded because nobody understands them. When go-to-market is really approached correctly, marketing shouldn't just be in service of the sales organization. That's a very important internal client, but it is not the only internal client. In a world where the self-driven journey and the brand is about what people say about you when you're not in the room, it is so incredibly important to make sure that there are resources available to not only support the sales organization, but support the post-sales, the account managers, client success, whatever you want to call it, because onboarding and initial value and intended value and extended value and cross-selling and upselling are so important with unlocking the long-term potential of that account. And when all of marketing's resources are focused on deals that are going to close in the next 30 days, there's zero time to be able to support learning management and webinars and onboarding and all those other things that are incredibly important for client success. It's also equally important for product strategy. It's typically not called product so much in most commissioning firms, but it's the same basic idea. It's understanding exactly what clients are wanting, what they're asking for, figuring out the strategic roadmap of what the firm's going to deliver versus not deliver. That needs marketing support as well. For any companies that work with in the technology part and the operator part, channel partners are really important. In commissioning, similar kind of firms, they're just usually not called channel partners. They're kind of other kinds of partners and other contractors they work with. That needs support both for recruiting and onboarding and scaling that up. And one thing that should land really close to you that we were talking about in planning this is employer branding. And that's where I see almost nobody is even doing the one-on-one level on that of like, why would somebody want to work here? Like,
exactly.
There are companies in the data center ecosystem that are doing it, but it's maybe 10 or 15% at the absolute most. And they don't want to hear a sanitized message that looked like it came out of a Canva template or ChatGPT. They actually want to see firsthand video clips from people that actually do work there, talking about what it's like to work there. And it was interesting. I spoke with a talent acquisition person about a year ago. And in the same way that a lot of prospects and clients in the self-driven journey are making decisions before they ever talk to a salesperson, there's a lot of candidates that are making decisions on whether they want to work for a company based on what they learn about that company through their own self-guided research. And ideally, things that are not sitting on your domain that were created by a generic corporate voice, but things that are a lot more authentic on what it would be like if they went to a conference or an event and they were talking to someone that worked on that team on that particular department, almost like the next level of like a Glassdoor kind of approach of understanding that. So I think there's an enormous amount of value in having events, virtual and in-person events, and content assets and social media assets and thought leadership that support talent acquisition funnels as well. Because in most cases, the talent acquisition people don't come from that same background of the person that they're actually recruiting.
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. I think we're kind of getting here into the sort of the psychology of marketing and sales and kind of everything that you discussed there. But as a recruiter, I can tell you firsthand, I've worked in an agency capacity. I worked internally for a company, hiring people. And, there maybe was a time a long, long time ago where, you managed to get a candidate interested purely on the benefits. If I'm recruiting for a tech company 10 years ago, it was, hey, free dinners, free lunch, ping pong table, pool table, all of those sorts of things, an amazing swanky office, and those things don't really cut it anymore. I think you've got to play to people's emotions, and why would someone want to join their company? And I find that most of the time, the ones that attract the best people can really showcase that, this is the firm where they're going to be doing the best work of their career, or they're going to get exposed to a different level, or they're just going to accelerate things at a much greater speed than what they're doing right now. If they're not getting the opportunity internally to progress, if you can showcase, here's 3 to 5 people that have joined the company as an engineer and now then principals, and they're leading divisions and they're leading teams and everything else like that, you can show that journey. You can really, as you say, get a one-to-one video with someone that's been at the company for 5 years, that's grown in what they've done, that speaks 100 times more valuable than we've got better benefits than this other company, or we give you an extra 2 days holiday. Like, yes, it's important, but it isn't that important compared to all these other things.
Yeah, it's social proof.
Yeah, exactly that.
Of what it's like to work there. So they
Yeah,
can,
exactly
before they make the massive financial investment of betting their career on your company, they can get a much better handle of what it actually is like to work there.
Yep.
One other counterintuitive part of GTM that a lot of people don't think about is if your company is in a perpetual raising mode where you're trying to get to the next funding round, the next funding round, the next funding round, for sure, your CFO and your founder need some support as well. And whether it's segmenting the CRM to understand what's truly going on, lots and lots of decks supporting things that are going in the data room. So all of these, when someone's thinking that they're going to play title games and compensation games and try to manipulate a candidate into taking a job 50%, 80% below market or some other nonsense that they're thinking is optimizing for a financial outcome as opposed to the company's brand. I don't know what games they're trying to think that they're playing, but in a world, again, where the brand of your company is no longer just the hex colors and the logo, and it's everything that the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room, it's so incredibly important to have these kind of content and events experiences that educate and build trust, as opposed to trying to think that you can buy your way in as opposed to earning it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. On top of that, last point I'd make on the talent acquisition side, and I'll give this as a first-hand example of how I work and something that I've actually done this week that just reiterates that. This is a very, very talent short market, data center commissioning in North America in particular. There's a lot of people, it is a finite market. There's a lot of people trying to hire these same people. They're kind of moving, it's just sort of going from one company to another company. They're kind of moving around a lot. You've got people coming into the industry, and the way in which I work is very much more kind of candidate led. So if I speak to someone and they're interested in a move, I'm actually relocating, or I'm looking to move into this area, or I'm looking to sort of step into this world. A lot of the work that I will do sometimes is say, right, well, look, I know these 5 or 6 companies. These are 5 or 6 companies that could be a good fit. Have a look at them. What do you think? And they don't come back and say, yeah, introduce me to all 6. They'll come back and say, these 2 look like great firms. Sometimes I can understand why, and I can understand because maybe they're very sort of particular strength in a functional area, but a lot of it is that the 2 or 3 that they're most interested in are ones that do a better job of marketing themselves. There's kind of that barrier broken down already. If I then go and introduce them to that firm, they've done that research, they're already kind of interested because, as you say, it's not just what does the logo look like, what's the brand look like, it's everything beyond that as well. What sort of content are they putting out there? Can they see about the people, the kind of projects that they're working on? This is all genuinely important stuff when you're trying to hire people that are very, very in demand, that 5 or 10 other companies are trying to hire exactly the same people.
Yeah. So you proved exactly our point on this, is that the companies, the clients, the hiring managers are not even getting an at bat. They're not even getting an opportunity with those candidates because so little resources went into proving that they're an employer of choice. And whether it's about going cheap, it's like, okay, well, if they're going cheap on employer branding, what else are they going cheap on that I don't know about yet? Or they're spending $5 million a year on the conference cult instead of funding a half a person or a full-time person working on employer branding. So there's some pretty big implications to the asset allocation model being really, really broken. Another thing that a lot of people don't think about also with the talent acquisition is I think a lot of these conferences are serving as like ad hoc job fairs where someone that's between jobs is going from booth to booth and exploiting and trying to hijack the booth as a recruit, as a job hiring kind of opportunity, and vice versa. There's people going to sessions where people are speaking and using that as a poaching thing. So I think if the boards of directors of these companies and the CFOs and the CEOs really understood that as much as like maybe 20% of these conferences are actually a poach fest, Why would you want to put yourself in that kind of environment when you're marketing to such a broad audience that you're also marketing to people that are actively working against your company's long-term interests? That's definitely one of the leaks in the bucket. I get why there's hundreds of people, maybe a couple thousand people globally, whose livelihood depends on keeping this going. What I don't get is why there's so much blind loyalty to it. And the interesting part is people talk about, is there an AI bubble or are these projects going to be slowed down and everything? I'm generally in favor of most of the development. What I don't think people are grasping is the unusual idiosyncratic parts of the ecosystem that's funding all of this growth. And how much of it is being sold on a wishful thinking that, oh no, our clients, they don't use LinkedIn. They would never watch a YouTube video. They would never look these things up on a generative AI tool. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm Gen X. All of the baby boomers that I know that are still working full-time or part-time on this industry, they all use these tools. Who do you think you're marketing to when you say that, it doesn't matter. We don't need a YouTube channel. We don't need to do webinars. We don't need to do LinkedIn. I'm like, what are you talking about? Have you even remotely done your homework on marketplace preferences, buyer preferences, and especially when you start getting into millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah, spot on. Well, look, that was a good sort of tangent that we went off there. I enjoyed that, and yeah, I think there's some very, very good points made there for sure. I've got a question for you that I'm sort of looking to bring it back, and it kind of takes us back to earlier in the conversation around, bringing more technical expertise into that sales process. And the question that I want to ask you, and to give a bit of context to this, is I speak to a lot of commissioning engineers that they are engineers by trade. They are technical people. They join a company and then they start to rise the ranks of leadership, and maybe they're leading the firm or they're in a senior position where, business development, sales, actually bringing in business and being a bit of a face of the company starts to be more of a responsibility for them. What would you say to an engineer, let's say a commissioning engineer, a mechanical engineer who's done commissioning, who's kind of rising the ranks of a company and now has been suddenly tasked with, what you need to be flying the flag for us here. You need to be helping us pitch and win work and get in front of that. What would you say to them around how to approach business development, or if they're maybe a little bit, I don't know, scared of it or unsure as to what to do?
I think a lot of it is a core part of being in that role. There's people that do client-facing work and there's people that don't do client-facing work. But a huge part of client-facing work going forward is being in these environments where you're essentially using training and development, professional development, learning and development as a core part of being able to shape the criteria long before the RFP is ever written, long before the client is engaged, because a lot of clients where there's seller's remorse, where you take on clients that maybe you shouldn't have, a lot of those problems start much earlier on in the journey. If you're managing expectations throughout that life cycle, a lot of times you can stack the decks in your favor with getting all of the people on the account to know exactly what you want them to know. And even better, like, okay, well, what happens if there's turnover? What happens if there's new people that are hired on the account? Well, that's the reason why you record these assets. And you package that into a learning center or academy or something like that. So anyone that joins can take a couple of hours and watch the videos, or take half hour, 30 minutes or whatever. And whether it's watching videos, whether it's interacting with the bot, but in terms of the person that has resistance to this, I think this is just a core part of being successful in the soft skills required to do this leadership role going forward. We now live in a world where so much of the decision on who to interview with, who to shortlist, is being made long before you get into the room. So being comfortable on video is really, really important. That said, I think a lot of companies that are putting PR in charge of that may not necessarily be coming at it from the mindset. The authenticity is super, super important for getting the trust factor going. So for the person that's a little reluctant to get involved, is think about a 12-step program for breaking out of the conference call. Now, it's a series of steps. And step number one is you're doing producing a 3 or 4 minute video that explains something and you're interviewing someone for a half hour and super casual. And if the recording doesn't turn out well, instead of the video being released, someone on your content team takes the transcript of that and turns it into a PDF asset or a blog asset or a tech asset or something like that. And you scrap the video. But it's like a fitness routine. It's the first time you go to the gym, it hurts like heck. It's very similar to the first time you are on webcam, that you're on camera, for the first time you're doing public speaking in front of small groups, in front of large groups. It's always scary the first couple of times. And the more you do it, the more you get used to it. It's like training for a marathon. There's actually someone I know that's in recruiting who I think runs marathons or triathlons. And there's a lot of analogies to the perseverance. And I think this is part of the reason why over time, CEOs love the idea of hiring athletes that played on university teams, professional athletes, former Olympians, because they know it's not just teamwork, it's battling, it's recovering from adversity, it's all of that stuff. And I think there's a lot of characteristics of being in these client-facing roles that require going forward that this is just another part of being able to communicate well. And whether it used 15, 20 years ago, communicating well was slides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's been, Gen AI has accelerated this. And now that's not even a minimum level of confidence that you can get knocked out, but you can't get hired just based on your slides. Being able to communicate on video, I think is so incredibly important. But in terms of the reluctantly promoted leader who is now in a place where being able to communicate with employees and contractors and clients and potential clients in an educational context as part of it, it's just a comfort level. Is the first time you do it, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. The next time you do it, it'll be a little more comfortable and a little more comfortable. And eventually you'll get to the point 3, 4, 5, 6 times where it starts to be something that you're super comfortable with and can start working on improving. But I think it's a core. I see increasingly in job descriptions for these kinds of roles that they want people who have experience, that have spoken at conferences, that have done media briefings, that have appeared on panels. I think this is an important part of the playbook going forward. Is being able to run your own little media company that supports everything you're looking to do with go-to-market. And I don't think it's any mistake that a huge part of the talent acquisition, the recruiting industry and this industry is coming to the conclusion that interview-based podcasts are a huge, huge part of being able to establish category authority.
So Joshua, look, keen to wrap up. I know we've been on for a while now. I had a great conversation. So the last question for me would be, if a commissioning firm leader could only fix one thing about how they win work in the next year, what would that be?
In most cases, what's preventing this from happening is there's culture within the company that are favoring this old school playbook, what some people even call dinosaur marketing. And in order to break out of that, there typically needs to be a CEO level communicate, a Slack message, an email, whatever it is, that said, look, I've visited some of the conferences in the last couple of months. I've hung out in the booth. I've done ride-alongs with him. And it's bothering me a lot that we have all these great experts in our company and our prospects and even some of our clients are treating us like crap. They're sarcastic, they're dismissive, they talk over us, they roll their eyes at us, they talk bad things about us behind our back. We're so much better than this. We have some of the top experts on the planet when it comes to data center commissioning, and it's time we let the industry know about it big time.
Yeah.
We want to be seen as the world leading experts on anything and everything that has to do with our part of data center commissioning. And going forward, we're going to make massive, massive investments to be able to make that happen. And this is the roadmap of what it looks like going forward. But the number one initiative is this has to start at the top. Otherwise, it ends up just being a turf war for budget between marketing and sales.
That's brilliant. It's a culture shift, ultimately. It starts at the top. It's a culture shift. And it's, as you say, recognizing that there is an issue. And then taking those steps to improve it. Okay, fantastic. Well, Joshua, this has been great. Thank you so much for jumping on. Where can people find you, follow you? Where would you direct them to sort of following this if they want to learn more about you and what you've got to say?
If you want to learn more about me and follow what I'm working on, LinkedIn is a great place to start. Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg. In terms of being able to keep up with our insights, we publish the Data Center GTM briefing. You can sign up for a free subscription to that on our website at DCSMI.com.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, thank you again for jumping on. Really enjoyed this, and we'll catch up soon, no doubt.
Thanks so much for the invite, Cal. Really, really enjoyed this conversation and looking forward to seeing more of the great things that you're working on in data center commissioning.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Joshua.
Nice, Cal.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn, Cal Blair, or head over to baselinecx.com for more information. If you or someone you know might be a good guest for the show, if you're a commissioning firm leader or a commissioning engineer with a great story to tell, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop me a message on LinkedIn, and we can set up a time to chat more about that. See you on the next one.
Most data center GTM teams are flying completely blind. 83% of your buyer's journey is happening before they even speak with someone from your sales team. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is powered by DCSMI. We've studied over 1,900 industry leaders to build a diagnostic framework that identifies exactly why deals fall apart and revenue stalls. Stop guessing and start benchmarking. Subscribe now to our weekly Data Center GTM briefing at www.dcsmi.com/briefing. Again, that's dcsmi.com/briefing. BRIEFING.